The blades of the UH-60 Black Hawk carved through the dense mountain air with a deafening, rhythmic thump-thump-thump that felt like it was driving spikes straight into Private Miles Corbin's skull. The helicopter was descending, and through the open side door, Corbin could see the ground rushing up, a sun-scorched landing pad carved out amidst rocky peaks and sparse, stunted pines. The air smelled of pine, dust, and something else. An elusive, acrid tang, maybe ozone from a nearby electrical discharge or chemicals. The chopper banked sharply, leveling off over a concrete circle with a faded white H in the center, and touched down gently. The engines whined one last time before beginning to spool down, settling into a low, vibrating hum. Corbin, gripping the strap of his duffel bag tightly, jumped onto the concrete. The heat hit him instantly, mingling with the cool downdraft from the spinning blades. He scanned his surroundings. The pad wasn't just enclosed by a fence. It was a multi-layered fortress of steel and wire. The first layer, a tall chain-link fence topped with gleaming coils of razor wire. Beyond it, separated by several yards, loomed a second, even more imposing barrier. Thick steel bars sunk deep into a concrete foundation. Fist-sized white ceramic insulators and heavy cables running along its length made its lethal purpose unmistakable. Numerous yellow signs emblazoned with black lightning bolts and the words "High Voltage." Lethal were posted every 20 feet. Behind the second fence, watchtowers were visible, massive structures of steel and concrete, their dark embrasures housing the barrels of something heavy caliber. The entire perimeter felt impregnable, hostile, designed less to keep things out than to keep things in. A tall man was already striding towards the helicopter, dressed in immaculately tailored field fatigues bearing no insignia except for captain's bars on his collar. His face was weather-beaten, etched with hard lines around his mouth and eyes. His graying hair was cut short. He moved with the economical precision of a career military man. He stopped a few feet from Corbin, giving him a quick, appraising look that swept from his army-issue boots to his high and tight haircut. Private Corbin? His voice was flat, emotionless, but loud enough to carry over the dying whine of the helicopter. "Yes, sir." Corbin snapped to attention. "Captain Thorne, Commander of Security Detachment, Rancho Valverde." Thorne's expression remained unchanged. "Welcome, Ranger. Or, at least, welcome to the assignment." There wasn't a hint of a smile. Thorne turned abruptly. "Follow me." Corbin hefted his bag and followed the captain toward the only break in the first fence, a set of heavy remote-controlled steel gates. As they walked, Corbin felt the eyes of other rangers on him, those patrolling the perimeter or standing watch in the towers. Their gazes held no curiosity, only a weary sort of guardedness. The atmosphere was thick with a mixture of strict military discipline and something else, heavy, oppressive, unspoken. Secrecy wasn't just mandated here. It hung in the air, a palpable presence you could feel on your skin. The isolation was absolute. The surrounding mountains formed a natural barrier, and the fences and towers completed the picture of total detachment from the outside world. They passed through several security checkpoints, where electronic locks clicked with dry finality, into a small briefing room. The walls were bare except for a few topographical maps and perimeter schematics. A table, a few chairs. Captain Thorne gestured for Corbin to sit. 2 other Rangers were already seated. One, wearing sergeant's stripes, had a Latino appearance and a tired but alert face, Sergeant Diaz. The other, a young Asian man about Corbin's age, had dark circles under his eyes, Private Chen. Both gave Corbin curt nods. "All right, Private," Thorne began, standing before the perimeter map. "The official cover story for this facility is a federal research center studying aggressive behavior in large predators and a quarantine zone for particularly dangerous animal species. Codename, Rancho Valverde, or simply the Ranch. Your mission, and the mission of this entire unit, is to ensure the security of the perimeter and internal containment zones. That means preventing any unauthorized entry from the outside, and more importantly, any unauthorized exit from the inside." Thorne tapped a finger on the schematic. "Security protocols here are not suggestions. They are law. Deviation from instructions is unacceptable. What you see or hear here stays here. Not a word outside the ranch. Violation of security protocols results in immediate court-martial. Questions?" Corbin shook his head. The phrasing was standard for classified sites, but the captain's tone left no room for doubt about the gravity of the warning. "Good. Now let's walk the perimeter." They stepped back out into the heat. Thorne led Corbin along the second, electrified fence. Double containment. Voltage on the inner fence is 20,000 volts. Outer fence, 30,000. Enough to stop a truck, or something bigger. He pointed to sensors embedded in the ground and mounted on the fence posts. Motion sensors, seismic sensors, thermal imagers cover the entire perimeter. Towers are equipped with M60 machine guns and Mark 19 40mm grenade launchers. Each tower covers its sector. Sectors overlap. Patrols run 24/7 on approved routes. Your number 1 job is to hold the perimeter. They approached one of the towers. The ranger on duty snapped a salute. "Why Rangers, sir?" Corbin ventured to ask. Thorne stopped, looking directly at Corbin. "Because what's inside Private requires a specific skill set. You've trained for close-quarters combat. You've worked with unconventional threats. You've been taught to maintain psychological stability under extreme duress. Regular security or police would be useless here. The subjects, as the scientists call them, are strong, fast, and extremely aggressive. Your job is to be ready to follow any order, including the order to apply lethal force to neutralize a threat. Absolute loyalty and discipline, that's what's required." They headed towards the armory, a small, fortified building. Inside, the air smelled of gun oil and metal. Thorne showed him the standard issue kit. "Your personal weapons: M16A2 rifle with an underslung Remington 870 shotgun, Beretta M9 sidearm, K-bar combat knife. Standard ammunition loadout." But he opened another case. "We also have some specialized gear." Inside the case were rounds that looked different from standard issue. 5.56 and 9mm rounds with silver cores. 12-gauge shotgun shells loaded with silver buckshot. The scientists claim it's more effective against certain biological characteristics of the subjects. He also gestured to shelves holding oversized flashbang grenades and devices resembling large flashlights, experimental acoustic disorienters, and high-powered tranquilizer rifles. You'll receive specific training on their use later. Enhanced body armor, helmets with integrated comms, and latest-gen night vision. As they stepped outside again, Corbin saw several large, featureless, corrugated metal buildings in the distance, nearer the center of the compound, resembling barns or warehouses. The barns, Thorne called them. Even from several hundred yards away, strange, unsettling sounds carried on the air. Low growls that escalated into drawn-out howls, dull thuds against metal that seemed to make the ground tremble. That's where the less stable specimens are kept, Thorne explained curtly, noticing Corbin's gaze. Maximum security zone. The atmosphere around these barns felt even more oppressive than near the perimeter. Before leaving Corbin in Sergeant Diaz's care to draw his gear and get settled, Thorne looked him squarely in the eye one last time. Remember the cardinal rules, Private. Never enter containment zones without a direct order and a science team escort. Never attempt contact with the subjects. Do not discuss anything you see or hear with anyone outside the operational group. Strictly adhere to duty rosters and patrol routes. Zero tolerance for any photo or video recording. Any violation, court-martial. Am I clear? Crystal clear, sir. Captain Thorne nodded once and walked away with his firm, measured stride. Corbin stood under the blazing sun, feeling sweat trickle down his back beneath the body armor he had yet to put on. The sounds from the barns continued unabated. He was here, at Rancho Valverde. Miles Corbin's very first shift was overnight. It seemed to be an unwritten rule, or perhaps a form of initiation for new arrivals at the ranch. Immerse them immediately in the most drawn-out, nerve-wracking part of the day. Daytime here buzzed with routine activity, personnel movement, the hum of equipment. But night transformed the facility, exposing its true, hidden nature. The silence became almost tangible, broken only by the monotonous drone of electronic systems within the walls, the distant, heart-wrenching howls drifting from the barns, and the low-frequency thrum of powerful ventilation systems pouring from grates rumored to lead down into the complex's subterranean levels. The so-called bunker. Corbin patrolled his assigned sector, a long, sterile white corridor in the main administrative and laboratory building. The floor was covered in light gray linoleum, the walls smooth plastic panels, the ceiling standard tiles inset with fluorescent lights casting a cold, dead glow. Every footstep in his heavy army boots echoed loudly, emphasizing the emptiness around him. Surveillance cameras hung at regular intervals near the ceiling, their dark lenses impassively tracking his progress. The feeling of constant observation never left him. He felt like a lab rat in an intricate maze designed by unseen experimenters. Time crawled agonizingly slowly. He checked the locks on laboratory doors, cross-referenced sensor readings on his communicator panel, made entries in the electronic patrol log. Everything was nominal. Boredom began to war with the tension that hadn't eased since his arrival. The walkie-talkie on his shoulder occasionally crackled with brief reports from other patrols or the dispatcher comms checks, reports of post changes. Around 2:30, as he passed the wing housing the biochemical labs, he caught an unfamiliar sound. He froze, listening intently. It wasn't the howling from the barns or the hum of the ventilation. Something else. A muffled scraping, like a heavy metal object being dragged across the floor. Then a short, sharp noise, either a choked cry or a growl, cut off instantly, immediately followed by the tinkle of shattering glass. Corbin instinctively put his hand on the grip of his M16. He checked the sensors on his comms unit. Corridor clear, no motion detected. The radio was silent. He waited a few seconds. Silence. Had he imagined it? Fatigue, playing tricks. But the sound of breaking glass had been too real. He keyed his radio on low power. Base, this is Patrol Delta Charlie 7. Heard a suspicious noise in Sector 3 Alpha, vicinity of BCL Labs. Sounds like equipment falling and possibly a cry. Corridor sensors are clear. Request instructions. The reply came almost instantly, the dispatcher's voice calm, almost indifferent. Delta Charlie 7, copy that. No scheduled work reported in Sector 3 Alpha at this time. Investigate the source of the noise yourself. Proceed with caution. Do not raise alarm without visual confirmation of a genuine threat. Probably just a lab rat got loose, Private. Out. Copy, Corbin replied, feeling a chill trace its way down his spine. A lab rat. He gripped his rifle tighter. Something about that phrase rang false. He moved slowly down the corridor toward the suspected source of the noise, weapon off safe, finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. He hugged the wall, trying to move as quietly as possible. The echo of his own footsteps now seemed deafening. Reaching a corner, he peered cautiously around it. The corridor was empty, but on the light gray linoleum just a few yards away was a dark smear. He moved closer. A few drops. Fresh. Blood. The drops formed an uneven trail leading to one of the laboratory doors marked BCL 113 Cellular Regeneration Studies. The door was massive, steel, but it was slightly ajar, open an inch or two. No lights were on inside. Only the dim red glow of emergency lighting spilled onto the floor from the gap. Corbin froze by the door. He quickly assessed the situation. Blood, signs of a struggle or an accident, an open door. Someone could be injured inside, or something could have gotten out. He checked the rifle's magazine, confirmed the underslung shotgun was loaded with silver buckshot. He switched on the weapon light mounted on his M16, directing the narrow beam into the crack. He pushed the door open with his shoulder. It swung inward silently. Corbin stepped inside, rifle at the ready, the beam of his light sweeping the room. The lab was plunged into semi-darkness, lit only by the red emergency lamps and his own flashlight. In the center of the room stood a large cage made of thick, clearly reinforced steel bars. Inside the cage, sprawled on the floor, was a huge, motionless form. The creature was covered in thick, dark fur, its musculature rippling even in repose. Long, thick claws on its powerful paws glinted in the flashlight beam. Its fanged maw was slightly open, revealing rows of yellowish teeth. A werewolf. The first one Corbin had seen this close. It was unconscious. Standing near the cage was a woman. Young, dressed in a white lab coat spattered with fresh blood, the same blood he'd seen in the corridor. She spun around sharply at the sound of his entrance. For a fleeting moment, stark fear flashed in her wide eyes, immediately replaced by cold irritation. It was Dr. Evelyn Reed, or Eris, as some staff called her. He'd seen her photo on the personnel board. "What are you doing here, Private?" Her voice was low and sharp, betraying none of the tension clearly visible in her posture. Corbin, still keeping her and the cage covered, nodded towards the blood on her coat and the floor, the overturned lab table, and the shards of a large glass flask nearby. Heard a noise, found blood. Came to check. Dr. Reed ran a hand through her hair, leaving a smear of blood in it. "I was conducting a late sample collection," her voice steadied, becoming professionally detached. "The subject exhibited unexpected aggression prior to sedation. I had to administer an emergency tranquilizer dose. He fell and knocked over some equipment. That's his blood. She gestured towards the still form in the cage. A minor incident. Everything is under control. Corbin lowered his weapon slightly, but didn't relax. He noted her beauty. Fine features, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, eyes that seemed unusually perceptive and intelligent even in the dim light. But her composure next to the enormous, dangerous creature, even sedated, seemed unnatural. She hadn't offered to call for backup, report to security, or notify her superiors. "Do you need assistance, ma'am?" Corbin asked. "No," she cut him off. "I need you to leave and let me clean this up. And forget you saw anything. I'll report a minor equipment incident myself in the morning." Her gaze was insistent. Corbin hesitated. This violated protocol. Any incident was supposed to be documented. But he was the new guy, making waves over what an experienced scientist called a minor incident could cause problems for him right off the bat. Besides, she seemed confident, and he didn't want to look like a panic-prone rookie. "All right, ma'am," he said finally. "But if you need anything, I won't need anything private. Leave." He nodded and backed out of the lab, carefully pulling the door closed behind him. As he returned to his patrol route, he could feel his heart pounding. The image of the werewolf in the cage and the calm, blood-spattered woman standing beside it was burned into his mind. Something was wrong here. Deeply wrong. And a host of unanswered questions settled heavily in his gut, mingling with the oppressive atmosphere of the endless night at Rancho Valverde. Night shifts became routine for Miles Corbin. Sergeant Diaz seemed to adhere to an unspoken policy of tempering rookies by darkness, and Corbin dutifully reported for duty when most of the ranch personnel were either asleep in their Spartan quarters in the residential block or down in the bunker, where, rumor had it, the main, most classified work took place. His world narrowed to monotonous cycles, patrolling the echoing, deserted corridors of the admin and lab building. Long hours of vigil in the security room before banks of monitors displaying grainy black and white or greenish images from cameras across the perimeter and in certain internal zones. Short breaks for dubious coffee in the company of equally somnambulant rangers, whose faces looked even more tired and gaunt under the harsh fluorescent lights. Night after night he walked the same sectors, checked the same doors, verified the same sensor readings. The monotony might have dulled his alertness, but the constant background tension pervading the ranch kept him on edge. It was during these endless night watches that he began encountering Dr. Evelyn Reed again. Their meeting seemed coincidental at first. He'd spot her leaving her lab well after midnight, tablet in hand, face set in concentration. Or he'd see her dark silhouette near the outer perimeter fence surrounding the barns, a strange place for a scientist at that hour, especially alone, given the strict security protocols prohibiting personnel from approaching containment zones without a security escort. Once he saw her quickly disappear behind a heavy blast door leading to the elevator for the bunker's subterranean levels, even though official access was restricted for most staff at her level. She was almost always alone, often seemed lost in thought, her shoulders tense as if carrying an invisible weight. Initially, their interactions were purely formal. A brief nod when passing in the corridor. A reserved evening doctor from him met with an equally reserved private in return. But Corbin was intrigued. That first encounter in the lab, her strange calm beside the immobilized monster, the blood on her coat. It all kept replaying in his mind. Besides, despite her stern demeanor and obvious absorption in her work, she was attractive, and her presence was a rare bright spot in the gray military routine and oppressive atmosphere of the ranch. Driven by a mix of curiosity, an inexplicable attraction, and perhaps simple boredom, he began looking for opportunities to talk. At first, it was just awkward attempts to break the ice. "Working late again, Doctor?" "Our nightclub seems popular tonight," he offered once when their paths crossed near the coffee machine. She just gave him a quick, assessing glance and said nothing, but he persisted. The next time, he asked a cautious question about her research, careful not to touch on forbidden topics. "Must be challenging studying such specific biological subjects?" She answered evasively, with generalities about the difficulties of working with genetic anomalies, the unpredictability of living systems. Gradually, very slowly, the ice between them began to thaw. Perhaps she, too, missed normal human interaction in this isolation. To his next joke about sleepless nights, she responded with a barely perceptible, fleeting smile. Sometimes she'd engage in brief conversation, sharing impersonal facts about the stress of working in a secure facility, the logistical challenges of obtaining rare reagents, the constant pressure from management for results. Corbin listened attentively, feeling his initial wariness give way to sympathy, even empathy. He saw not just an enigmatic scientist, but a young woman trapped in this strange, dangerous place, doing work he couldn't even begin to imagine. During one of these infrequent conversations, late one night in the empty mess hall where she'd gone for water, Aris mentioned almost casually that the behavior of some specimens had been changing recently. "They're becoming unpredictable," she said, looking off into the distance. "Their responses to standard stimuli aren't the same. It's like something shifted." She said it quietly, almost matter-of-factly, like stating a scientific observation. Corbin didn't attach much significance to her words then, chalking it up to the inherent risks of her work with dangerous creatures. He couldn't yet connect it to the strange sounds he heard more frequently at night, or the general atmosphere of anxiety thickening over the ranch. The night itself seemed to have a life of its own at the facility. Corbin learned to distinguish its sounds, the quiet, stealthy footsteps of other patrols in distant corridors, the continuous low hum of life support systems emanating from the barns and the bunker ventilation shafts, as if a huge mechanical beast breathed beneath the earth. The harsh sweeps of searchlights from the watchtowers, snatching sections of the perimeter out of the darkness. And of course, the sounds of the inhabitants. Anxious growls escalating into soul-chilling howls that made the blood run cold. Dull thuds against metal, the screech of steel structures straining under some furious assault. Over time, Corbin began to differentiate the voices, the deep bass roar of some, the high-pitched hysterical shrieking of others. Sometimes, strange, guttural noises that vaguely resembled attempts at communication. Morning briefings, conducted by Captain Thorne for the outgoing and incoming patrols, increasingly included reports forwarded from the science staff. Initially, they were cautious mentions, almost hypotheses, about a typical behavior in some individuals housed in the barns. There were accounts of creatures demonstrating unexpected cunning, figuring out automatic feeder mechanisms to get extra food or using objects introduced for enrichment, not as intended, but to test the strength of cage bars or enclosure walls. Incidents were documented that scientists reluctantly interpreted as attempts at interspecies communication, specific sequences of growls, howls, or even gestures. Some rangers on observation posts confirmed it. Certain subjects in the open paddocks used for strictly controlled daytime exercise had begun showing distinct interest in guard shift schedules and patrol routes, freezing and watching the humans with unnerving focus. The ranch leadership, a mixed council of military brass and senior scientists, initially dismissed these reports. Coincidence, random occurrences, excessive anthropomorphism from observers eager to see intelligence where none existed. Standard explanations meant to calm personnel and prevent panic, but the evidence kept mounting. Rangers in the towers and on patrol around the barn's perimeter also noticed changes. The werewolves, particularly those in the third largest barn, were behaving differently. There was less aimless, blind rage. Instead, something akin to methodical exploration of their environment emerged. They approached the fences more often, but instead of throwing themselves against them in fury, they meticulously examined them, testing structural integrity with claws and teeth at specific, clearly chosen points. Near the base, at weld seams, close to the gates.
Several times, patrols observed werewolves attempting to use rocks or thick branches that had somehow gotten into the enclosure as primitive levers or battering rams, probing the strength of the mesh or the concrete foundation. Furthermore, some individuals previously active only at night began showing increased activity during the day, contradicting established behavioral models. It was as if they were adapting, studying their captors and their prison. Soon, a series of small but disturbing incidents occurred that could no longer be dismissed as coincidence. Technicians conducting a routine inspection of the fencing around one of the Barn 3 enclosures discovered a damaged section of mesh near the ground. Several bars had been neatly bitten through or pried apart. The damage wasn't extensive, but its nature suggested the use of a tool rather than claws or teeth. Later, in the same barn, an unexplained malfunction occurred in the video surveillance system. The signal from several cameras in one sector went dead for half an hour. When the system was restored, no obvious cause for the failure could be found. And a day later, a set of heavy steel wrenches went missing from a technician working on the ventilation system near the containment zone. He swore he'd left them on his tool cart for just a couple of minutes while turning to check a control panel. The wrenches vanished without a trace. Each incident, taken individually, was attributed to possible personnel negligence, technical glitches, or even attempted sabotage by disgruntled employees. But the overall picture was becoming deeply unsettling. In smoking areas, the mess hall and break rooms, Rangers began discussing the events in hushed tones. Rumors spread, embellished with speculation. They said the creatures were getting smarter, that they were planning something. Captain Thorne cracked down hard on such talk, reminding everyone of discipline and urging heightened vigilance and strict adherence to protocols. But a sense of foreboding hung heavy in the air, thickening with each passing day. During one of his late-night encounters with Dr. Reed, Corbin shared his observations and concerns. mentioning the talk among the rangers, the incidents. He expected to see worry, or at least surprise, on her face. But Eris listened intently, and her composure struck him as odd, almost unnatural. She didn't look surprised. "Intelligence is a side effect," she said quietly, looking down at her hands. "Some of the experimental serums we're testing, they're designed to stabilize their condition, to increase control over aggression, but they also affect cognitive functions, accelerate thought processes. We're working on it. Everything's under control, Miles." She used his first name for the first time, and it sounded unexpectedly intimate in the sterile night corridor. She assured him the science staff was aware of the changes and taking necessary precautions. But her words didn't reassure Corbin. Instead, they raised more questions. If the scientists knew about the subject's increasing intelligence, why hadn't security measures been tightened sooner? Why did leadership keep talking about random incidents? A few nights later, while patrolling the outer perimeter of the barns, Corbin witnessed something that finally shattered his trust. He was some distance away, concealed by the shadow of an auxiliary building. He saw Eris walk quickly to the wall of Barn 3, the very one where the most alarming behavioral changes had been observed. She stooped near a large ventilation grate close to the base of the wall, swiftly placed a small, dark container beside it, and then hurried away, glancing around nervously. Due to the distance and darkness, Corbin couldn't make out exactly what she had left. He hesitated. Report it. But report what? He wasn't sure what he'd seen. Maybe it was a sensor or an air sampling device. Accusing a lead scientist based on vague suspicions was dangerous. And he didn't want to implicate Eris, for whom, despite everything, he still felt a growing attraction. He decided to stay silent. For now. The atmosphere at the ranch grew heavy, charged, like the air before a violent thunderstorm. Security measures were indeed tightened. Patrols became more frequent, issued extra ammo loaded with silver rounds. Weapons checks were mandatory before every shift. Everyone at the facility, from privates like Corbin to senior officers and scientists, sensed it. Something was about to break. It happened deep in the night, around 3 a.m. A deafening, ear-splitting siren suddenly tore through the thick silence of Rancho Valverde.
Simultaneously, red emergency lights flared to life throughout the corridors and across the grounds, bathing everything in a pulsing, ominous crimson glow. Standard lighting cut out. Corbin's walkie-talkie, carried as he patrolled the admin building with Private Chen, erupted with the dispatcher's panic-distorted voice. All posts, attention. Code red breach, Sector Gamma. Repeat, breach from Barn 3. All tactical teams converge on Sector Gamma immediately. Lethal force authorized. Barn 3. Chen breathed, his face pale and taut under the flashing red lights. That was the barn housing the largest, most unpredictable specimens, the ones whose behavior had caused the most concern in recent weeks. "Let's go," Corbin yelled, and they sprinted down the corridor toward the nearest exit to the grounds. The air vibrated with the siren and distant sounds, shouts, the clang of metal, and soon the first short, sharp bursts of automatic weapons fire. Bursting outside, they plunged into chaos. Red emergency lights snatched fleeting figures from the darkness. Technicians and junior science staff in white and blue jumpsuits scrambled in panic toward the relative safety of the admin building, their faces masks of terror. In the distance, in Sector Gamma, where the roar of battle was escalating, muzzle flashes flickered. Corbin and Chen, joining a few other rangers running in the same direction, reached the inner perimeter separating the barns from the rest of the complex. The scene that greeted them was horrifying. A huge section of the barn 3 wall, thick steel plates reinforced on a massive frame, had been literally ripped outward, twisted chunks of metal littering the ground. Several creatures had erupted from the gaping hole. 3 or 4 enormous figures, moving with incredible speed on 2 or 4 legs, darted across the red-lit clearing. Werewolves. Their dark fur gleamed, powerful muscles bunched beneath it, long claws gouged deep grooves in the concrete. Their roars mingled with the siren's wail and human screams. Rangers already on the scene had opened up with a fusillade of fire. But it was immediately clear this wasn't the blind, chaotic attack of rampaging animals. The werewolves were acting with astonishing coordination. One, the largest, charged forward, drawing the majority of the fire, weaving and using sparse cover equipment containers, concrete barriers. Meanwhile, 2 others rapidly flanked the ranger position, attempting to break through to the next fence line or attack the men from exposed sides. They moved low to the ground, using the darkness and shadows where the emergency lights didn't reach. Their speed and bestial strength were incredible, but their actions revealed tactics, calculation. Corbin saw a technician caught in the open, overtaken by one of the flanking werewolves. A short, choked scream, and the monster's dark form momentarily obscured the man. When it sprang away, only a mangled body remained on the concrete. Nausea churned in Corbin's stomach, but there was no time for shock. One of the werewolves, dodging a burst from another ranger, charged directly at him and Chen. Adrenaline surged, sharpening his senses. Corbin snapped his rifle up and opened fire. The roar of the shots was deafening in the enclosed space. He aimed for the massive creature's chest and head. The silver rounds clearly caused pain. The werewolf roared, dark patches blooming on its fur, but it didn't stop. In a few bounds, it was upon them. Corbin barely managed to dive aside as a clawed paw slashed through the air where he'd just been, striking sparks from the concrete. Chen opened fire with his rifle at point-blank range. The werewolf whirled on him, swatting Chen aside with a powerful blow. The private flew several yards, slamming against a wall, his rifle clattering from his grasp. He groaned, clutching his side. Corbin fired again, switching to the underslung shotgun. A blast of 12-gauge silver buckshot hit the monster in the shoulder and neck. It roared again in pain and fury, staggering back but not falling. Its eyes burned like red coals in the emergency lights. It tensed for another leap. Just then, reinforcements arrived. Another squad of rangers led by Captain Thorne. Simultaneously, the heavy M60 machine gun from the nearest watchtower opened up, sending fiery tracers lancing towards the breach. The werewolves found themselves caught in a crossfire. Using their numerical advantage and tactical discipline, Thorne's rangers began pushing the creatures back. The fight was short but unbelievably vicious. One of the flanking werewolves was riddled with bullets and collapsed. Another was driven back into the gaping hole in the barn wall. The largest one, the decoy, riddled with wounds but still moving, tried to break through the outer perimeter but was stopped by several precise shots from a grenade launcher on the tower. Bursts from stun grenades and a direct hit from a fragmentation round finally brought it down. The last werewolf, seeing its pack-mates fall, darted into the darkness beyond the lit area and vanished, swallowed by the night. The siren continued its relentless wail, but the gunfire died down. The air hung thick with the smell of cordite, blood, and burnt fur. The aftermath of the breach was grim. 2 Rangers dead, several wounded, including Chen. At least 3 civilian personnel had been killed. Sector Gamma was a wreck. Corbin stood breathing heavily, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold his rifle. The adrenaline slowly receded, leaving behind icy fear, nausea, and a ringing emptiness in his ears. He saw medics carrying the wounded Chen away. He saw the bodies of his fallen comrades. And then he noticed a group of scientists who had arrived after the fighting stopped. Among them was Dr. Evelyn Reed. She stood over the body of one of the slain werewolves, holding a scanner. Her face was utterly calm, focused. She examined the creature's wounds, fur, claws with cold, professional detachment, making notes on her tablet. Not a flicker of fear, grief, or even revulsion. The morning after the breach dawned on Rancho Valverde under a heavy, oppressive silence, broken only by the sounds of machinery in Sector Gamma, where crews hastily patched the hole in Barn 3's wall, and the muted conversations of the staff. Fear and mutual suspicion poisoned the air. An emergency meeting convened in the admin building's conference room. Top military security officers, including Captain Thorne, were present, along with the scientific leadership, several older, stern-faced men and women in lab coats over business attire. Corbin, as a direct participant in the firefight, was summoned to give testimony but spent most of the time waiting outside the door. From snippets of conversation drifting from the room and Thorne's subsequent brief for the Rangers, it became clear. The official narrative attributed the incident to an unforeseen spike in spontaneous aggression among a group of test subjects, possibly triggered by an external stimulus. Potential stimuli mentioned included the previous day's thunderstorm or a hypothetical malfunction in the sedative delivery system within the barn. Blame was being subtly distributed between the insufficient structural integrity of the enclosure, supposedly not designed for such a coordinated assault, and possible errors by the duty security shift, which allegedly failed to react swiftly enough to the initial signs of trouble. Not a word about the organized nature of the werewolves' actions, their obvious tactics, or the signs of increasing intelligence. All inconvenient facts were neatly swept under the rug of the official report. The consequences were immediate. Security protocols were drastically tightened. Patrols doubled, especially around the barns and the bunker perimeter. A full, comprehensive inspection of all containment systems, locks, sensors, force fields, electric fences was initiated. Movement within the facility now required additional authorization and was subject to heightened scrutiny. The atmosphere of paranoia became almost palpable. Rangers eyed scientists with open distrust, seeing their experiments as the root of the problem. Scientists, in turn, returned glances filled with veiled contempt for the brute force unable to appreciate the importance of their work, fearing the military would tighten control so much it would impede research. Corbin couldn't shake the events of the previous night. The official story felt like a blatant lie. He replayed the battle in his mind. The coordinated werewolf movements, their clear tactical cooperation. It wasn't the blind fury of animals. He remembered the container he'd seen near the Barn 3 ventilation grate days before the breach. The container Eris had left. Was there a connection? Could she have helped them? The thought felt monstrous, but it wouldn't let him go. Driven by these suspicions, Corbin decided to act. Waiting until the main repair work in Sector Gamma was finished, but the area wasn't yet fully sealed off. He used the pretext of a perimeter check to approach the breach site unnoticed. He carefully examined the twisted edges of the steel plates and found what he was looking for. Several fractures showed strange, deep scores, unlike claw marks. They were smoother with characteristic burrs, as if made by a powerful cutting tool or hydraulic shears. Then he went to the ventilation grate at the base of the wall, where he'd seen Eris. Scrutinizing the ground and the grate itself, he found traces of a viscous, almost clear substance with a faint chemical smell lodged between the bars. He carefully collected a tiny sample in a sterile evidence bag he carried per regulations. What was it? A corrosive accelerant? Or something that attracted the werewolves, causing them to attack that specific spot? He tried to find Eris to question her directly, but it proved difficult. After the incident, she became even more withdrawn, spending most of her time either in her lab or down in the bunker, where Corbin had no access. When he did manage to cross paths with her in a corridor, she looked tired but outwardly calm. She expressed formal regrets for the dead and wounded. To his cautious questions about possible outside interference or the reasons for the werewolves' atypical behavior, she responded evasively, again citing stress, the unpredictability of biological subjects, and complex biochemical reactions. Her composure, her ability to so easily dismiss the obvious anomalies, seemed increasingly unnatural, almost sinister, to Corbin. At the same time, Corbin began to notice he wasn't the only one interested in Dr. Reed. The ranch's internal security, a separate unit in gray uniforms reporting directly to facility command, had clearly placed her under discreet surveillance. He saw plainclothes personnel following her at a distance several times, saw her access card scrutinized longer than usual at internal checkpoints. Her movements were being tracked much more closely than before. She seemed aware of the attention but didn't alter her behavior, continuing her work schedule with unwavering external calm. The situation came to a head several days later, late in the evening. Corbin was part of an augmented 3-man patrol himself, Sergeant Diaz, and another ranger, Private Bell. They were inspecting technical access tunnels beneath the main building. Suddenly, their radio crackled. It was Eris's voice, sounding surprisingly agitated, almost panicked, requesting their specific patrol unit. Patrol Bravo Zulu 5, respond. This is Dr. Reed. We have an emergency. During an urgent transport of a high-value specimen from the bunker to the lab for analysis, there was a containment equipment failure. The subject escaped. It's somewhere in the utility tunnels beneath Sector Delta. It's sedated, but could regain consciousness any moment. Requesting immediate assistance in locating it. We need to find it before it gets out and triggers a general alarm. Diaz exchanged a look with Corbin and Bell. The call sounded plausible, given recent events and the general nervousness. Copy that, Dr. Reed. Give us your location. We're en route. Entrance to the tunnels under Sector Delta. Waiting for you. Hurry! Eris's voice was tight with strain. Something clenched in Corbin's gut. A bad feeling. High-value specimen from the bunker. Equipment failure. Requesting help specifically from their nearby patrol. It felt too much like a setup. But orders were orders, and a request for help from a senior scientist in an emergency demanded an immediate response. They headed for the indicated location. Dr. Evelyn Reed was waiting for them at the massive steel door stenciled utility tunnels. Sector Delta, restricted access. She stood under the single dim bulb above the entrance, her lab coat unbuttoned, hair disheveled. She genuinely looked frightened, her breathing rapid and shallow. She clutched a small handheld device with a blinking screen. Seeing the approaching Rangers, Corbin, Sergeant Diaz, and Private Bell, she stepped forward, gesturing urgently. "Thank God you're here." Her voice was strained. It went deeper into the tunnels. It's a large male alpha of one of the bunker groups. Designation, Specimen 734. He received a heavy tranquilizer dose before transport, but apparently not enough. He might be disoriented, but still extremely dangerous. We have to find him fast. She pointed to her device. He has a subcutaneous tracker implant. Signals still stable coming from this direction. She waved a hand toward the dark opening beyond the door. Sergeant Diaz gave a curt nod. "Bell, you take the rear. Corbin, you're behind me. Dr. Reed, stay between us. Weapons ready, eyes open." They stepped through the doorway, plunging into a different world. The air was stale, thick with the smell of dampness, machine oil, and mold. Water dripped from the ceiling, thick with heavy cables and pipes of varying diameters, forming small puddles on the concrete floor. Infrequent caged bulbs provided meager light, leaving large sections of the tunnel in deep shadow. Their footsteps echoed loudly off the walls, mingling with the dripping water and the low hum of distant machinery. The atmosphere was oppressive, claustrophobic. The beam from Diaz's helmet light sliced through the darkness, illuminating tangles of conduit, rusted valves, and branching tunnels receding into blackness. They moved slowly down the main tunnel, following Eris's directions and the beeping of her portable tracker. The device emitted increasingly frequent, urgent signals. "He's close," Eris whispered, her voice trembling. Signals getting stronger. The Rangers advanced with rifles at the ready, fingers on triggers. Their helmet lights cut narrow cones through the darkness, nervously scanning side passages. Corbin felt like danger lurked around every corner, in every shadowed alcove. He heard faint rustling noises from side tunnels, the distant scrape of metal on concrete. The sense of a trap, which had begun topside, intensified with every step. He watched Eris out of the corner of his eye. Her fear seemed genuine, but something in her eyes as she stared at the tracker screen bothered him, an intensity that didn't quite mesh with panic. They reached a junction where the tunnel split into two narrower passages. Eris's tracker beeped frantically. "He's here. Right here," she breathed. And at that exact moment, dark, swift shapes lunged at them from the shadowed side tunnel to the left, and from a large ventilation shaft on the right. It wasn't just one werewolf. There were at least three. Huge, heavily muscled eyes glowing in the dark, and they were clearly not disoriented or sedated. Their attack was lightning fast, coordinated, and incredibly savage. An ambush. It all happened in seconds. A furious roar shook the tunnel. One werewolf leaped onto Private Bell, bringing up the rear. Bell managed a short burst, but the creature was already on him. There was a sickening crunch of bone and a strangled cry. Bell's helmet light rolled away, momentarily illuminating a horrific scene, the monster tearing into the ranger's body with its claws. Diaz and Corbin opened fire simultaneously on the other two attackers. The tunnel exploded with the roar of gunfire, muzzle flashes, the stench of cordite and beast. The confined space hampered movement. The werewolves used the darkness and their knowledge of the tunnels, bursting from the shadows to attack, then darting back into obscurity. One launched itself at Diaz. The sergeant met it with rifle fire, but the creature, despite taking hits, knocked him off his feet. A desperate struggle ensued on the tunnel floor. Diaz yelled in pain but kept firing his sidearm at near point-blank range. Corbin fought off the third werewolf, backing along the wall. He emptied nearly a full magazine, aiming for the head and chest, but the monster was incredibly resilient. A clawed paw slashed across his body armor, leaving deep gouges and knocking him down. He slammed his back against the damp concrete wall. The werewolf loomed over him, fanged jaws snapping. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Corbin saw Eris. She was pressed against the wall. Her fear seemed to have vanished. She wasn't screaming, wasn't trying to run or help. She was watching. Her eyes darted between the fights. With astonishing, almost inhuman agility, she dodged the paw of a werewolf that swept past her towards Diaz. But she made no move to engage. At one point, as the werewolf battling Corbin prepared for a killing blow, Corbin saw Eris's lips move, forming a silent, unintelligible word. The attacking werewolf hesitated for a fraction of a second, as if listening, giving Corbin the chance to roll away and bring his rifle back up. Corbin, get her out. Topside, now. Sergeant Diaz's ragged shout cut through the chaos. Corbin saw the sergeant, grievously wounded, shove the werewolf off him with a final surge of strength and fire his pistol again, covering their retreat. I'll hold them. Go. The last things Corbin heard as he grabbed Eris, who submitted with surprising ease, and scrambled back towards the entrance were the final shots from Diaz's pistol and the sergeant's raw, agonized scream, cut short by a horrifying snarl. They fled through the dark tunnels back towards the exit, stumbling in the gloom. Corbin dragged Eris by the arm. She was no longer feigning fear, her face an unreadable mask. Just then, the alarm sirens across Rancho Valverde shrieked again. But this time it was a different sound. Higher pitched, intermittent, signaling a catastrophic failure. The radio on Corbin's shoulder crackled to life, choked with panic transmissions. Multiple breaches. Sector Delta. Bunker. Repeat. Breach from the bunker. Security overwhelmed. They're everywhere. Corbin burst from the tunnels onto the surface, pulling Eris with him, and froze. He understood everything. They had been lured into a trap. The attack in the tunnels was a diversion, meant to draw off security and buy time for the main event. The breakout from the subterranean bunker, where the most dangerous specimens were held, and Dr. Evelyn Reed, Eris, standing beside him now with cold composure on her face, had known. She was part of it. A traitor. Emerging from the suffocating darkness of the tunnels into the cool night air, Corbin and Eris found themselves at the epicenter of hell unleashed. The siren shrieked its high, panicked wail. Pulsing red emergency lights cast bloody reflections on buildings and fleeing figures. The air throbbed with the roar of gunfire, explosions, creature snarls, and human screams. This wasn't just a breach like before. This was a full-scale uprising. Werewolves, dozens of them, had broken free not only from the damaged Barn 3, but, far more terrifyingly, from the subterranean bunker. These creatures were different from the barn inhabitants. They were larger, more powerful, their movements not just fast but chillingly deliberate. They moved not as a chaotic mob, but in organized groups, systematically attacking key defensive points of the ranch. Their goal was clearly not blind destruction, but the capture and annihilation of the facility. Corbin saw one group of bunker werewolves, massive beasts standing nearly 8 feet tall, with gray or black fur and eyes glowing in the dark, assault the main checkpoint leading off the compound. They obliterated the fortified guard post in seconds, scattering concrete barriers and twisted steel like cardboard boxes. Another group tore towards the armory, evidently knowing where the specialized weapons were stored. A third attacked the administration building, where most of the unarmed personnel had taken refuge. A powerful explosion rocked the compound from afar. Likely, one of the substations powering the perimeter fences had been destroyed. The remnants of the security forces, rangers and ranch internal security, fought desperate, doomed battles across the grounds. Corbin saw pockets of resistance. A handful of rangers defending the entrance to the main lab building, laying down heavy fire against advancing creatures. Someone firing from the roof of the residential block. Technicians under fire trying to reach damaged generators to restore power to the fences. But the odds were overwhelming. The bunker werewolves possessed not only monstrous strength and speed, but also astonishing resilience to conventional weapons. Even silver rounds only slowed them, didn't always stop them. They operated with cold, calculated fury, bypassing strong points, attacking from unexpected angles using their knowledge of the layout. Corbin, stunned by the explosions and Eris's betrayal, froze for a moment, rage and despair warring within him. He shoved Eris aside and joined the nearest group of defending rangers at the lab building. Among them he saw Captain Thorne. The captain's face was smeared with soot and blood, his uniform torn, but he continued directing the defense, barking short, clear orders, firing his own rifle. His squad was taking heavy losses. 2 rangers already lay dead at the entrance, another was badly wounded. Corbin opened fire, adding his weapon to the desperate symphony of battle. He fired, changed magazines, fired again, moving from cover to cover. Adrenaline dulled the fear and the pain from the fight in the tunnels. He saw comrades fall, saw werewolves ripping through steel lab doors, heard the screams of scientists from within. It was a fight to the death, and he knew their chances were almost zero. Amidst the chaos, he scanned for Eris. Where had she gone? He couldn't believe she'd just fled. And then he saw her. She wasn't hiding. She moved through the battle with an almost inhuman grace and purpose. She wasn't attacking directly, but several times Corbin watched in horror as she gave short, sharp commands, a gesture, a quiet word, to the attacking werewolves. And the creatures, the most ferocious beasts from the bunker, obeyed instantly, changing their direction of attack, or letting her pass. She was their leader, their queen. At some point, Word of Eris's role must have reached the remnants of Ranch Command barricaded in the bunker control center if it still functioned, or Captain Thorne himself.
Over the general comms channel, through static and the sounds of battle, came an order, delivered in a trembling but resolute voice, likely a high-ranking security officer. All surviving units, attention. Dr. Evelyn Reed identified as hostile target, highest priority. Repeat, Dr. Reed is hostile. Order, capture or eliminate. Execute immediately. The order reached Thorne's position. The captain, spotting Eris heading towards the shattered entrance to the bunker, yelled, "Get her! Fire!" The few surviving Rangers, including Thorne and Corbin, tried to surround her. But Eris was impossibly fast and strong. She moved like a blur, dodging bullets. Something glinted in her hand, a scalpel or a strangely shaped knife. She wounded 2 Rangers before they could react. Her strength was clearly unnatural. But Thorne was a seasoned warrior. He fired not his rifle, but a specialized tranquilizer gun he must have picked up from a fallen IS trooper. The heavy dart, loaded with a potent neurotoxin, struck Eris in the shoulder. She cried out in pain and surprise. Her movement slowed and she stumbled, falling to one knee. Corbin, closest to her, rushed forward, rifle ready. He saw the pain and fury in her eyes. She was wounded, surrounded. It seemed over. But what happened next burned itself into his memory as pure nightmare. Wounded, Eris lifted her head and made a low, guttural sound. One of the huge werewolves fighting nearby instantly broke off its attack and approached her, lowering its massive head. It moved with visible reluctance, yet obeyed an unseen command. Eris, fighting through the pain, reached out and grabbed the monster's thick neck fur. And then Corbin saw it happen. Eris's lips peeled back in a grimace, revealing fangs that seemed to abruptly lengthen, growing sharp and predatory. She plunged them into the werewolf's neck and began to drink its blood. The enormous werewolf convulsed, whimpered, but remained still as she drank. Its body began to tremble, weakening rapidly, its eyes rolling back until it finally collapsed unconscious, its fur dulling. And the wound on Eris's shoulder, where the dart had struck, healed visibly before Corbin's eyes. The bleeding stopped, the skin knit together, leaving not even a scar. She straightened, contemptuously flicking away the empty tranquilizer dart. The monster's blood stained her lips. She rose to her feet, fully restored. The healing transformed Eris. The last vestiges of human weakness or feigned fear vanished. Her movements became even more fluid, flowing, filled with predatory grace. She drew herself up to her full height, an undeniable authority radiating from her stance. She swept her gaze over the few remaining Rangers and the trapped scientists, those who could still see her from windows or through shattered openings. Cold fire burned in her eyes, a mixture of contempt for her former captors and fury for years of imprisonment and experimentation. The human within her had retreated, yielding to something ancient and powerful. She raised a hand. The gesture wasn't sharp or threatening, but it carried absolute command. The werewolves, who had continued their chaotic attacks on the remaining pockets of resistance, suddenly froze, their growls dying. They turned their massive heads towards her, awaiting orders. The silence, falling after the relentless din of battle, seemed deafening and sinister to Corbin. Eris lowered her hand, pointing towards the main laboratory building at the command center. It was a silent order for the final slaughter.
and the werewolves surged forward to obey with renewed, doubled ferocity. The last, most brutal phase of Rancho Valverde's destruction began. The remaining ranger squads were overwhelmed by the superior force, now operating with terrifying purpose. Captain Thorne, attempting to organize a retreat for the last survivors of his unit towards the helipad, died in an unequal struggle against 3 giant bunker werewolves. He fought to his last bullet, his last breath, trying to stop Eris and her monstrous army. But his courage was no match for their power and numbers. Werewolves stormed into labs and administrative buildings. The sounds of shattering equipment, tearing metal, and the death screams of scientists and staff echoed across the compound. They weren't just killing. They were systematically destroying all evidence of their existence there. Computers, data servers, tissue samples, experiment protocols. Fires erupted everywhere, whether deliberately set or sparked by damaged equipment. Black smoke mingled with the red glare of the emergency lights, painting an apocalyptic scene. Security systems were completely offline. Electric fences were dead or breached in multiple places. Heavy gates were torn from their hinges. Rancho Valverde, once an impregnable high-tech prison and laboratory, was reduced to smoldering ruins strewn with the bodies of humans and a few werewolves slain in the fighting. Corbin survived by some miracle. He was wounded by concrete shrapnel or a stray bullet he couldn't recall, concussed by a nearby explosion, disarmed in one of the final skirmishes. He sat slumped against the remnants of a concrete wall, watching the unfolding nightmare through hazy eyes. He saw Thorne die, saw the final fall of the ranch. He waited for his turn. Sooner or later they would find him. And she did. Aris approached him, moving silently through the debris. She stopped a few feet away, looking down at him. There was no rage in her eyes, no malice. Only a cold, detached curiosity, like a scientist observing an interesting specimen. Corbin met her gaze, making no attempt to look away. He was ready to die. She studied him for several long seconds. For an instant he thought he saw a flicker of something else in the depths of her inhuman eyes. A memory of their brief nighttime conversations, or just fleeting pity for a creature standing infinitely beneath her. He would never know. Then she turned away. "Live, dear Miles," she said quietly, her voice even, almost indifferent, yet laced with new, unfamiliar undertones. "Tell them, if you can." With those words, she walked away towards the center of the ruined complex where the surviving werewolves were gathering. There were many, dozens. The bunker specimens, the strongest, the most intelligent. They stood not like a feral pack, but like a disciplined army awaiting its commander. They no longer snarled. Their movements were calm and assured. They watched Eris with clear reverence. Eris walked into the open space before the gaping maw leading down into the destroyed bunker. She stopped and looked up at the star-dusted night sky. And then, before Corbin's stunned, disbelieving eyes, the final, most incredible transformation occurred. From her back, tearing through the fabric of her lab coat and the skin beneath, 2 enormous wings erupted with a sickening, tearing sound like dry branches snapping. They resembled the wings of a giant bat or pterodactyl, covered not in feathers but a tough, dark membrane stretched over a bony framework. Their span was easily 20 feet. Eris unfurled them, momentarily blotting out a section of the starry sky. She let out a piercing, inhuman cry, not of pain or rage, but a triumphant summoning call that echoed off the surrounding mountains. And then, with powerful strokes of her newfound wings, she effortlessly lifted into the air, soaring into the dark night sky. The werewolves on the ground raised their muzzles, watching their queen ascend. Then, as if on command, they turned and, as an organized, silent pack, moved away from the ruins of Rancho Valverde, heading into the surrounding mountain forest, their dark forms quickly swallowed by the darkness. Miles Corbin was left alone amidst the smoking, twisted ruins of Rancho Valverde. Night slowly yielded to the cold, gray, pre-dawn light filtering through the pall of smoke rising from numerous fires. A dead silence reigned, broken only by the crackle of burning structures and the occasional faint moan of the dying, not yet reached by death or rescue. He was alive. But at what cost? His body ached from countless bruises and abrasions. His left forearm was scraped raw. He couldn't remember how. Maybe claws in the last fight. Maybe the sharp edge of torn metal. The wound bled sluggishly, but shock numbed the pain. He was concussed, his head ringing, sounds muffled as if heard through cotton. Worse than the physical injuries was the terror gripping his soul in an icy vice. The image of Eris, fanged, drinking monster blood, her wings, her inhuman cry, the exodus of the intelligent werewolf army. It all felt like the delirium of a wounded, broken mind. But he knew it was real. A terrifying, unimaginable reality he had witnessed. He tried to stand, but his legs gave way, and he collapsed back onto the concrete rubble. The full weight of what had happened crashed down on him, a monstrous truth his mind refused to accept. Hours seemed to pass. The eastern sky began to lighten, painted in pale dawn hues. And then he heard it, a distant, growing drone. Helicopters, not one but several. Soon 3 heavy CH-47 Chinooks and 2 AH-64 Apache gunships appeared, circling the ruins, assessing the devastation, before descending towards a clear section of the helipad. Troops in full combat gear rappelled down quickly. Not rangers, but soldiers from some specialized unit, their uniforms and equipment different. They spread out, moving cautiously, weapons ready. Medics and personnel in hazmat suits carrying analysis equipment followed. One of the search teams found Corbin. They helped him up, checked his wounds, applied a field dressing. He tried to speak, to tell them what happened, about Aris, the werewolves, but the words caught in his throat, emerging as incoherent mumbles. The men who found him looked at him with sympathy but no comprehension. They saw only a shell-shocked, wounded soldier who had survived some catastrophe. He and a few other seriously injured survivors found among the wreckage were evacuated on the first Chinook to the nearest military hospital, hundreds of miles away. After receiving medical treatment, once he was somewhat lucid, the debriefings began. Officers in sterile uniforms with no insignia and cold, appraising eyes came to question him. Military intelligence. They asked, what happened? How did the fire start? Was there an explosion? Who attacked the facility? Corbin tried to tell the truth. He spoke of Eris, Dr. Evelyn Reed, her betrayal, her inhuman nature, how she drank the werewolf's blood, how she grew wings. He described the intelligent werewolves, their coordinated assault, their departure under her command. He spoke haltingly, jumping between events, desperately trying to convey the full horror of what he had witnessed. The officers listened intently, took notes, but in their eyes he saw only disbelief mixed with professional interest in the symptoms of severe combat stress. Very quickly, the official story was made clear to him. The disaster at Rancho Valverde would be explained as a tragic confluence of events. A major fire caused by faulty wiring, leading to the explosion of an experimental power reactor, which never actually existed. All mention of the facility's true purpose, the werewolves, Dr. Reed, all of it was classified at the highest level. The few survivors, including Corbin, were unequivocally ordered to remain silent under threat of court-martial and life imprisonment in a secure facility. His official diagnosis: severe post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, complicated by combat concussion, with episodes of visual and auditory hallucinations. He was transferred from the regular hospital to a specialized military medical center, a high-security closed institution. Here he was to be treated, kept under observation, and, he suspected, have his memories adjusted through medication and therapy. He had become an inconvenient witness, the bearer of a terrifying truth the powers that be wanted buried forever. Days turned into weeks. Corbin lay in his hospital bed in a room with barred windows. They fed him drugs that made the world seem dim and unreal. Psychologists worked with him, trying to convince him that everything he'd seen was a product of his traumatized imagination. Sometimes he began to doubt himself. Maybe they were right. Maybe it had all been a horrific nightmare. But one night, under the bright light of a full moon outside his window, he heard a soft tapping sound on the glass. He froze. The tapping came again. Slowly, fighting the drug-induced weakness, he went to the window. The bars were solid, but he could see through them. He pulled the cord for the blinds, raising them, and saw her. Eris hovered in the air just outside his window. Her dark wings spread motionless in the moonlight. She wasn't wearing a lab coat, but something dark and close-fitting. She looked directly at him, and on her lips played a faint, enigmatic smile. Corbin recoiled from the window, his heart pounding wildly. It wasn't a hallucination. She was here. She had found him, and her smile promised nothing good.